Okay, here we are back at the calendar. I mean, it was just like yesterday that I turned this calendar from February to March. Now it is March the 29th, 2021. Can you believe that? I can't even believe I've lived this long, much less to be able to look at 2021, March the 29th. Somebody had the audacity to send me a Facebook telling me how many more sleeps there were till Christmas. That friend is no longer a friend of mine on Facebook, I'll tell you that right now. So anyway, the 29th, we're on the 10th block and the 11th block because block 10 and 11 are the same, just a different size. So here we go. This is block 10. Yummy and delicious. Nothing we haven't already done. Some squares, some half square triangles. Pretty simple, pretty basic, same thing. If you haven't got half square triangles down by now, probably you're hopeless. But I know you've all got them done. I know you have, because I've been seeing them, and I've been so proud, like a proud little mama. So anyway, I'm going to come over here, and we're going to go through it one more time, because there will be blocks that we will be doing things we haven't done before, so just wait for that. But right now, I'm going to be here at the cutting table. I've already made all of them but these two half square triangles. Remember, if the bed of your sewing machine is not this long where you can use your tape, you have to draw the line, sew on each side 1/4 inch, then come in and cut on the line from corner to corner. This is like Groundhog Day, because we have done this so much. You look at the book, you find out what it says. Now it's going to give you the finished size. What does that mean? That means you have to add a 1/2 inch to the finished size to get what size you need to square these up to. So just a little sliver comes off, and then I'm going to cut my little dog ears or bunny ears. We're saying bunny ears until Easter's over. Alrighty, do it again. You know, for each pair of squares, you get 2 half square triangles. So in this instance, we needed 2, 4, 6, 8. So we needed 4 sets of squares. Get rid of the bunny ears after you've trimmed. Remember, I made that mistake one week. I only did it just so you guys would know. Now comes the pressing. Get out our clapper. Make sure our iron is awake. How long has it been since you've cleaned your iron? Remember we talked about cleaning our iron? And if you've run out of bobbin thread, you need to be cleaning in where your bobbin is. You don't need to change a needle yet. But after this project, you will want to change your needle. Give everything a good dust and a clean. Remember to, every time you're done sewing, if you've got water in your iron, take it out. I keep my water in this little old measuring cup here. And then every time I leave the studio, I just unplug the iron first, of course. Then I pour the water out. All right, Peter, now we're ready to come back to the sewing machine. Got my shoes off. Look at my socks. Cute. What's it say? Measure twice. Of course. Measure twice. Always good. All righty, now let's put these on the way they're supposed to go. Is that right? No, it's supposed to go like this. So the lines are going like this. See that?
Uh-huh. Looks nice.
Yeah, so.
That's a nice block.
That's a nice block, okay. So,
nice.
I've sewed this row together, all 4 of these. I sewed these 2 together, sewed these 2 together, then I sewed this to this to this. So I'm going to do it again down here on the bottom. if you feel more comfortable sewing on the piece of fabric that doesn't have any seam allowances, you can always flip that over, but make sure you're sewing on the correct end. Use your 1/4 inch. By now you should know where your 1/4 inch is. You should feel really comfortable. I mean, after all, we're on block 10. We're professionals now, right? Now this week, since the block is really, really simple, and again, you're going to do block 10 and 11 because they're the same block, but they're different sizes. Just like last week when we did all 3 sizes of the same block, same thing here. Okay, I'm going to press these open. Now, if you don't press open, and it's fine with me if you don't press open, you know, it's a personal preference, definitely. Some patterns will tell you which way to press so that your seams will lock together. And if you prefer to do that, that's fine too. But I'm going to teach you how to do that because it's a little bit different than pressing seams open, okay? So, when we press a seam towards one side or the other, and there's not a dark or a light, I like to press towards the piece that has less seams, unless the pattern's telling me which way to press. But before I press, I'm going to do what's called set my seam. And I'm just going to lay the iron on the seam, heat the seam up so that the threads are a little bit more pliable. And then I'm going to just lay my iron down and press to one side. Can you see that? Now that lays pretty good and flat. If I would have pressed to the other side, let's just see what that does. First, I'm going to set my seam. That loosens the thread up, heats the thread up so that it's a little bit more pliable. This one, can you see how it doesn't lay as flat? See how it's kind of wanting to come up because of this seam right here? So this is the reason I press open, because then it doesn't matter. And I don't have to set the seam before I press. And some people who press open do press to one side or the other first, and then they come back and press open. I find that that's just twice as much work, so I don't do that. My blocks are flat enough for me. I'm the one I have to please. So if it's good enough for me, it's good enough. And it should be the same way with you. It's your sewing room, it's your fabric, it's your quilt. You do it however you want. Whatever makes you comfortable. I'm working on a quilt right now that I am not liking it very much at all. I don't like the fabric. I'm wrestling with it. It's giving me fits, and I'm just not enjoying it. But unfortunately, it's for a customer, so I have to keep on working on it. But if it were mine, I'd say, I'm done with you. All right. Sound effects. Did you hear those sound effects?
I did. Those are good sound effects.
Those are. Alrighty, now I've sewed those together. Now I'm going to do this. Sew this together. Now, some people, when they sew, they only care about the edge that they're sewing on. Okay, so they only line this edge up. And then this edge could be kind of like that. Well, if that edge is like that, and you let go of this, it's going to slip. So don't just pay attention to the edge you're sewing. Pay attention to the entire block. Make sure it's all lined up. That way, it's going to sew more straight. Good tip? Good tip. You know how Martha Stewart had that, her little saying was, what was it?
I don't know.
Oh, shoot.
We'll have to come back to that.
Yeah, it'll come to me.
You know what else is a good tip?
What?
A Q-tip.
A good Q-tip is a good tip. You know, I don't think of a Q-tip as having a tip, really. I don't know. I think of tips as more of pointy things. But anyway, it's a good thing. That's what Martha Stewart always used to say. It's a good thing.
Just like a good Q-tip.
Just like a good Q-tip. All right. I'm going to press this open. Some good looking points there. All right. Now I'm going to lay this back down, making sure, now see these are opposite. I could have laid it this way and that would have been a design change. I don't like to call it a mistake, I just like to call it a design change. But this is the design I prefer. I'm going to lay that on top of this, pick it up, and here comes the pinning. And again, line those seams up, fold it back, make sure as I walk it up.
So I have a question about pens.
Uh-huh.
If I have a box of pens that I hadn't used in a while, and I go to pen with them, and they seem like they just aren't smooth and shiny,
Uh-huh.
are those salvageable, or do I just buy a new box of pens?
Now, let me tell you, Peter, you're not going to believe what I'm going to show you. You're not going to believe it, okay?
Okay.
But if you've got some of those at home, I want you to go home and try this, okay?
Okay.
All you have to do is pick the pen up and swish it in your hair a couple times.
Put some oil on it.
Put some oil on it, and all it takes is just a little bit out of your hair. And it
I
works.
believe it. I
It
believe
works
it.
every time. I'm
I
not
believe
kidding.
It. That's what I do with my shears, my fabric shears.
Is it really?
Uh-huh.
So see?
Yep, I'll run the blade
I
just on
didn't
my
think
hair.
you would believe me.
No, as soon as you said
It's
hair, it's
true.
like I knew exactly what you were talking about.
It is so true. And the other thing is, they sometimes will get rusty, especially if you leave them in the fabric. Don't ever leave needles, pins, safety pins, anything like that in your fabric if you're going to store your fabric, because the moisture will collect, and eventually the stainless that is supposed to keep them from rusting is so thin that it wears away, and whatever chemicals have been treated with, the fabric's been treated with, eats that away, and so then eventually they do rust. Now what I like to do is in my pins that I've got stored away, now my pin cushions, my pins get used a lot in my pin cushions. So they're in and out of my pin cushion, and that friction is keeping them sharp and smooth, okay? But if I have pins in a box at home, you know those things, the little packages of beads or whatever are inside them that you get in your shoes and
The seasoning packet?
No, it's not a seasoning packet. It's a thing to keep things dry.
silica.
A silica packet. A silica packet. I save all those. And I put them in my safety pins. I put them in my needle. I have a big box that I keep all different kinds of needles in. I've got one in there. I've got one in my bobby pins, in my paper clips. Yeah, I just throw them in with the box, and it just keeps the moisture from doing anything to that metal. And so that's another good thing, or good tip. We're going to call ours good tip instead
Can we
of
just
good
call them
things.
Q-tips?
No, don't call them Q-tips, because that's a manufacturer. We'll get copyright laws against us. No, they're not Q-tips, they're good tips. They're the good tips. Okay, so, wow, I didn't expect us to go into the pin rant, but I'm glad Peter asked that. Now, this is Peter's favorite part, where you find the point,
Love that. Favorite part.
put the pin in the point, find the other point, match it up by putting the pin in through that. hold that, pinch it tight, not really tight, I don't know why I said that. And then just put a little pin in there to secure it. Take that pin out. I'm going to put a pin down here because I don't want that flopping around. And then if you feel like you need to, so it doesn't slip down behind you, if you feel like you need to put a pin in the middle of these, you certainly can. It never hurts. Can you have too many pins? I don't think so. Certainly the people who make the straight pins don't think so, I bet. Okay, so there we go. Now this block is almost done. And then block 11's done the same way, only it's smaller. But it's the same technique. You know, you're going to make your half square triangles. You're going to look in the book and see what they finish at, and you're going to add a 1/2 inch, and that's how you know what size to square them up to. And voila! Let's press this and look at how pretty it is. Dad tried to get out of the house 3 times yesterday. He really kept me on my toes. We have to keep the doors locked, but we keep the keys really nearby, but in a little hiding place where he can't find them. He has one of those little, well, it's not little, it's kind of big carts, or it's, I can't remember what to call it. It's on wheels, it's electric. I had to hide the keys because he would get out and he wouldn't know where he was. He didn't know how to get back. So anyway, he's been restless this week, bless his heart. Okay, here it is. What do you think? Pretty snazzy. Love it. Love the colors. Look at the colors compared to the colors that the other one is. Okay, this is the cookie tin one, and this is the Primrose Garden. And then this is number 11, and my number 11 is going to be these colors. That's going to be just beautiful. Okay? I love that. So that's going to go with that. Ooh, yum, yum, yum. That's going to be so delicious. So get that done this week, okay? Okay. Now, since I knew, look what Peter did for me. Put all my lesson plans together. Okay. Since I knew that wasn't going to take very long, I kind of wanted to sit down and talk with you. This pattern that we're using from Moda, my friend Michelle White, I know I've told you this before, wrote it. And she is top-notch when it comes to writing patterns. She's not the only one, but some patterns leave a little more to be desired. You have to kind of read between the lines, okay? And some patterns are really explicit. So we like the patterns that are really explicit. So it might be a good idea if you pick up a book or you pick up a pattern that you like, that you open up and you glance through it a little bit just to make sure you understand their language. Quilting is a language all its own, and sewing. So you want to make sure that you understand what they're talking about. Now I went out on the floor out here in the shop and I picked up this free pattern because I can't show you other patterns because they're under copyright. But this one I can show you because it's free. You can come in and get it. It goes with this panel that we have of all these little trailers. And Peter cut me a fat quarter of one of the fabrics. It has a panel and it has these all kinds of fabrics. I don't know how many SKUs it has, but for this pattern, here's all the fabrics that you need. And it tells you exactly what you need and how to cut it and how much of it you need. So there's the panel. Pretty fun. Here's the border print. And here's all the fabrics that coordinate with it. Look at that fun stripe. Oh, I love that. Fun, fun, fun. I was just out there looking at this stuff and didn't even see that. So anyway, here's what the pattern so they use that stripe, I bet, as the binding. And then there's the border print with the trailers going around in a row. And here's the panel. But in between the panel, you see these blocks and these sashings. Okay, here's the block, kind of a shoe fly kind of thing, monkey wrench maybe. And then there's this pieced sashing. So what I thought we would do is we would just open up this pattern and see if we can understand it. Okay? So let's open it up. First of all, it starts by telling you the SKU number and how many of what you need. So you need one panel, 1 yard of this fabric, 1 yard of 3/8 of that fabric, and so on and so forth, okay? The batting size that you need, and here's what they used. Of course, you can use anything that you want. Piecing and sewing thread, quilting and sewing supplies. And it tells you who the quilt design was from, and the skill level is advanced to beginner. Advanced beginner. Oh, an advanced beginner. So somebody this isn't their very first quilt. But you don't have to be very advanced to do it. So then that's how you find the numbers of which ones that you need. Now here's the interesting part, the cutting. Now this pattern is fantastic. It is cutting instructions. Please note all strips are cut across the width of fabric. And in the pattern, it's going to refer to that as WOF. And most patterns, that's something that you need to learn. That WOF stands for width of fabric. Now, what does that mean? That means from salvage to salvage edge unless otherwise noted. So width of fabric is from the finished edge to the other finished edge. And that's what this is. This is the finished edge right here. And if this weren't a fat quarter, if this still was a 1/2 yard, there'd be another one down there, okay? And then these are the unfinished edges, this side and this side. So this is the width of fabric from salvage to salvage. This, if you cut it this way, from raw edge to raw edge, and it could be however many yardages you bought. So if you bought 2 yards, that's how long it would be. 36 and 36 is 72. So it'd be 72 inches long, you see, length of fabric. You buy it by the length, not by the width, okay? The width of cotton fabric today is anywhere between, it's supposed to be 45, but by the time it gets printed and gets rolled onto the bolt and blah, 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 it could be anywhere between, I call it 43 to 42 inches of usable fabric. And I usually, when I'm figuring a quilt, if the pattern doesn't tell me what I need, or if it's a pattern I've designed, I will always calculate 42 inches. That way I know I'm pretty safe. Fabric used to come 36 inches. Isn't that funny? The bolts were little baby bolts, 36 inches folded in half so that they were only 18 inches tall, the little bitty bolts. So anyway, that was pretty cute. Another little bit of information you probably don't need to know. So width of fabric is WOF. Length of fabric is LOF. So that's something good to know. So from fabric A, that's your camper panel, you're going to fussy cut 6 14 by 10 rectangles, each centered on a panel. So go back to the panel. There's the panel, what it looks like, and you're going to fussy cut those out. Now, what does that mean, fussy cut? Well, fussy cut is where you take your ruler. Okay, this is a 6.5-inch ruler. So let's say I want, and this is the middle. I don't know if you can even see that or not. Let me find some. Oh, here we go. Can you see that that shows me right where the middle of this ruler is? That little circle with the cross hatches of white lines. That's the center of my 6.5. So let's say I wanted these to be 6.5-inch blocks. And I'm going to say, well, that kind of looks like the center of my little trailer there. So I'm going to put that right on the center of my block, and then I would just cut this out. And I'm not going to pay attention to any of this stuff out of here because I want that to be my focus. Okay, so I like that one, but it's not going to allow me probably to have this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. You know, it looks like I might only get 2 out of a fat quarter. I don't even think I can get 2. Maybe I can get this one over here. Yeah, I probably could get that one. So that's a lot of waste. Okay, but because this is a panel that you're cutting it out of, not as much waste. See that? Okay, so I wanted to demonstrate that to you, what fussy cutting was. All right, let's continue on. So we fussy cut the center, fabric A. We fussy cut, see this letter in the number in parentheses, that's how many I need to cut. 14-inch by 10-inch rectangles. And then I go down to fabric B.
I have a question.
Okay.
We've run into the pattern that we're currently working on where it talks about finished size.
Finished size.
So on this pattern, if I'm looking at this like a new, somebody who hasn't, maybe who has done a quilt or two, and then I'm looking at this pattern, then how do I cut that? Do I cut it exactly like it says?
Excellent question. In the cutting instructions, you go exactly by what they say. Because we haven't sewn anything yet. We're cutting them to get ready to be sewn. Usually when they used finished or unfinished measurements, it's after we've sewn the block somehow, okay? So then it tries to tell you what to square it up to. These instructions are always exactly what you want to cut. Does that make sense? All right. So now we're going to cut from fabric B 6, because that's in parentheses, 4-inch by width of fabric strips. So from salvage to salvage, usually it comes folded in the middle on the bolt. And at the beginning of this series of My Favorite Colors Moda, I taught you how to find the straight of grain and how to fold the fabric so that it's straight and fold it in half, and then you can cut strips by the width with the fabric. And then it says to subcut. So we're going to take that strip. We're going to take, I wouldn't take all 6 of them. If you're comfortable cutting 4 layers, you could take 2 and then 2 and then 2 strips and cut them separately. But subcut 12 4 by 17 strips. So you've already cut it 4 inches. So now you're just going to whack it off at 17 inches. Boop, boop, boop. Okay? So 6 strips will yield, you should be able to get 12 4 by 17 strips. Then down here of the same fabric, you're going to cut 3 2-inch by width of fabric strips and then subcut those. They're already 2 inches, so you're just going to subcut them into 10-inch strips, 10-inch sections. See that? So the first measurement is the size that it already is. So then you only need to cut this measurement to get your actual subcuts. That's what subcut means. All right. So same down here. Going to subcut 6 5.5-inch squares from one 5.5-inch width of fabric strip. 5-inch, 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 subcut 12, 5-inch by 2 3/4 strips. Cut 2 3/4 by width of fabric strips. Now, I'm used to cutting 1/2 inches. So this 3/4 inch might throw me off a little bit. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my highlighter, and since it's not 1/2 inch, it's something different than 1/2 inch, I'm just going to put a little highlight there just to remind me that's something different than I'm not really used to. So here's 5.5, 5.5, 5 3/8. Oh my gosh, I'm really not used to cutting 3/8. So see how if I highlight that, I know that I need to pay better attention. I need to really pay attention to what that says. 3/8 down here, 3/8, 3/4. Anything that's not something that I'm used to. Now down here's a 1/4. I might highlight that because I'm used to cutting halves. See, here's half again. And then here is 4 3/4 and 4 3/4 by 91 and 71. That's going to be length of fabric. So I definitely am going to highlight that because now, see, all this time I've been cutting with the fabric. I'm going to get down here and I'm going to just not even pay attention.
Oh, yeah. I would be sewing the ones that I cut with the fabric to make the 91 inches is probably what I would have done.
Yeah, you might not have had enough fabric.
And then the pattern would be completely.
Right, and you really wouldn't have had enough fabric.
Uh-uh.
So see, so this, you open up and do length of fabric. Now
I never thought to highlight the different parts.
Yeah, it's your pattern. You can do it whatever you want to with it. If you don't want to mark up the original pattern, you can make a copy for your own personal use. But you never, ever want to copy something that's copyrighted and then either sell it or give it away. You can't even give it away. That's not, it's just, it's against the law. That's just the very, very blunt part of it. It's against the law to copy anything that is copyrighted and either give it away or sell it. You can do it for your own personal benefit. So if you wanted to make a copy of your book so that you could highlight or write in it and make notes, you can do that. Then just destroy it after you're done. Okay, so here I've got length of fabric. So that's going to remind me. And I have done all this before I've ever even gotten my fabric out of the bag. Okay? Now some people just pick up the pattern and go and look at the picture and just do it.
I tried that once.
Yeah, it didn't work out very good, did it?
It sure didn't.
No, So see, that's why this is so nice. So then here's our binding fabric. And then here's the backing fabric. So here we are with the fabric. So everything looks good. 95, 2.5. Okay, all that looks good. Now, if this pattern just so happens it does it. It has you cut the biggest piece first. Okay? This 4-inch is bigger than the 2-inch. If these were reversed, I'd be making a note of that because I am always going to cut out the largest piece first. So from this fabric, the 4 inch is the largest piece. From fabric C, the 5.5 is the largest. From fabric D, the 5 inch is the largest. Do you get the trend there? So see how this is 5 3/8, then 3 inches, then 2 3/4, 2 inches and 2 inches. So they just get smaller and smaller. The reason you want to cut your biggest piece first is to make sure that you still have enough fabric to get that big chunk out of it. So if you start with the big chunk and work your way down, you can always use what's left over from your big piece to cut some of your smallest pieces if you make a mistake. So that's a really good point, okay? That's another one of those good tips. We need a little bell or something. We need some sound effects from whenever we say good tips. Don't you think? Now comes the sewing.
We need some wind chimes.
We need something. Sew using a 1/4 inch seam allowance with right sides together, and then it tells you that from now on in the pattern, it's going to refer to right sides together as RST unless otherwise indicated. Always press towards the dark fabric while assembling unless otherwise noted by the arrows. Now, if this were my pattern and I was doing this quilt, I would have ignored that because I like to press open, just my preference. Note, the arrows in the figures represent the fabric print direction. Now, if you're working with fabric that has a direction, just like, what does that mean? Well, if these campers are all going the same way, this fabric is directional, and it is very much so directional. If this trailer were upside down or sideways and they just were hickly-pickly, how do you like that word? Hickly-pickly. I love that word.
Like pickles in a pickle jar?
I don't know, but hickly-pickly. I've said that all my whole life. I don't even know what it means.
This is the first time I've heard it.
Is it?
I'm using it.
Okay, hickly-pickly. If they were just thrown on here, hickly-pickly, then it would just be an all-over fabric and wouldn't have a direction. Okay? So pay attention to that, especially like if you have stripes, something like that. So you want to pay attention when you're cutting stuff out that doesn't get you, come back to bite you. Okay. So 1 2-inch by 10-inch fabric B strip to each side of 1 14 by 10-inch fabric A. So here we've got the diagram. This is that big fussy cut piece. I'm going to put my my lid back on my marker here so I don't get, and then I'm going to get my stiletto. Well, I'm going to get my chopstick out because I like to use my chopstick. So now we've got fabric B and we've got fabric A, and so we're doing 2-inch by 10-inch down each side. So that's going to be here and here. So we've sewn this to this and this to this, and then we're going to sew this piece on, okay? Now look, it's making half square triangles exactly the same way that we made our half square triangles. Place a 5 3/8. There's that 3/8. We know we cut it right because we highlighted it and we paid extra attention. Square on top of a 5 3/8 inch fabric F. So you know for every pair of fabrics that you put together, every pair of squares, every fabric E on top of fabric F, you're going to get 2 half square triangles, correct? You're going to make 24 of these. 24. So that means you're going to need 12 sets. Okay? So I want you to do that. Draw a line across the diagonal, figure 2. So a 1/4 inch away. You guys know how to do that. Cut the square apart on the drawn line to make half square triangles. Trim the half square triangle to measure 5-inch square. Now that does not say finished, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to highlight that to say 5-inch square. And then I might even take my pencil and give myself a note to square up to 5 inches. Okay? So that's going to yield me 2 unit 1 squares, figure 4. Right there it is. See? Repeat to make 24 units, and it tells me that right there. So I might make myself a little note. 12 square sets. Just to, you know, make myself a little note. Now I'm down here, and evidently they want me to sew this to this, this to this, make 6, make 6, make 6, make 6. Now I need to know unit squares, 5-inch squares. So again, square up to 5 inches. That doesn't say finished, so I know if it doesn't say finish, it means that that's what I square it up to. That's the unfinished size. So I'm going to make myself a little note. I'm going to highlight that just to be sure. So you probably have figured out already that these little units and these little units are going to go together somehow because they're the same size. I hope this is helping. I really do. Now this next unit that we're going to make, okay, look. We're going to put all those together. We've got 4 half square triangles. We've got 4 of our little bar units, and then we have our square.
Now, let me stop you right there.
Okay.
Anybody watching this video who shops here, every one of us quilts. So if somebody has a question on the pattern that they're currently working on and they need somebody to kind of come in and walk them through it, you know, we're happy to, you know, bring your pattern in. We can walk you through it. Not a problem.
And you know what? We are not so gullible to think that we know everything. If we don't know the answer, we'll find somebody here that does. Because there is so much talent underneath this roof in our little 22 people that work here, that if one of us doesn't know the answer, probably somebody else working that day would. And so we are going to help you find the answer somehow, some way, even if we have to look it up.
And there's been days where the pattern is really could be interpreted a couple different ways.
Yeah.
So there'll be 3 of us consulting at the cutting table.
Correct.
Coming to an agreement, figuring out how the outcome of the pattern is supposed to be, and then work backwards to figure out what they need you to do.
Take advantage of that. Really. I'm serious. If you don't just sit in your room and stew about it, okay? Come in, let us help you. That's one of the biggest thrills that we have is helping people. That's what we're here for. We're in the business of helping you make beautiful quilts. So we don't want you stewing. We want you to have a happy experience. So yeah, definitely. That's a good point, Peter. I'm glad you brought that up. So anyway, we're back to putting our units together, and then we're going to sash this just by sewing the sides on, and then the top and the bottom, and then that would complete figure 10. So let's go and find figure 10. Repeat to make 6. It wants you to make 6 of those. Okay? Is it going to tell me how much it squares up to? Square total. Make 6. Block 2, make 6. Make 6 units, figure. Okay. I don't see where it tells me what this squares up to, so I'm going to figure it out myself. I know that these are 5 inches, right? And I know these are 5 inches, and I know these are 5 inches. So I'm going to take 5, and I'm going to subtract, and I'm going to subtract a 1/2 inch. And that equals 4 1/2. Okay? And that's my finished size. I have 3 4 1/2 inch squares. So I'm going to take 3 times 4 1/2, and that's going to give me 4 and 4 is 8, 10, 11, 12, 13 1/2. Okay, so that's 13 and a half. Well, I've used up both of these, and I've used up both of those, but I still have a seam allowance out here. I have a 1/4 inch there and a 1/4 inch there. So now to this 13 and a half, I have to add back in another 1/2 inch, which equals 14 inches. So these are going to square up to 14 inches. Okay, and if you did all your cutting correctly, and you did all your pressing correctly, and you did all your sewing correctly, this should be 14 inches. So did you understand how I got to that, Peter? Was that confusing?
Well,
Can I do it again?
because we took off the 1/2 inch here and a 1/2 inch here.
We took off all the 1/2 inches. We took off all of them, okay? And we found out what our finished size was going to be. So we took our 5-inch square. You know, we had a 5-inch square to begin with because we squared them up back here. Remember this? Where we squared them to 5 inches. So we know those were 5 inches. And we know these are 5 inches. But we have to take off that seam allowance on all of them. Take the seam allowance off of all of them. So there are 3 units, 3 5-inch units. So I'm going to take 3 times 4 1/2, that's the finished size. 3 times 4 1/2 equals 13 1/2, does it not? Is that true? 4 and 4 is 8.
Yep.
12 plus 1 1/2 is 13 1/2.
Yep.
So 13 1/2. I've used up both of these seam allowances, and I've used up both of these seam allowances. But I still have a seam allowance out here, and I still have a seam allowance out here until I sew it into something. So I have to add, this is a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and this over here is a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now I have to add in another 1/2 inch, which brings me to 14 inches, and I know that this now squares up to 14 inches. Now, am I glad I'm doing this before I'm sewing? Of course I'm glad I'm doing it. You know? Because I want to understand the pattern before I really get into it.
Because maybe one seam was a little deep.
Right.
Or one seam was too shallow.
Right. And you know when you're going to know that if it's off? Is because this right here, this piece right here, is 14 inches. Look at that. It's 1 1/4 by 14 inches. So what did we say this was going to square up to? 14 inches. If this square's not 14 inches, this band is not going to fit on the sides. Okay? And then this band, now that we've sewed this on and this on, becomes from here to here, becomes 15 1/2. And so now this one's going to fit on because it's 15 1/2. So see that?
That's very cool.
Isn't that cool? Okay. Now I got in a little deeper than I thought I would.
What a nice little pattern.
Isn't it nice? You see? But you kind of have to know where you're going. Now I love this. This is what I call a connecting corner block. I don't know what they call it, but I call it a connecting corner block. It is where you take a big square, and then you take a little square and you draw on a diagonal line. But this time, instead of sewing a 1/4 inch away and a 1/4 inch away, you're going to sew on the diagonal line. Okay? And what you're going to do then is you're going to move over a 1/2 inch, and you can sew again if you want to, and then you'd have a little
baby.
It's a baby. But you don't have to do that. That's just something that Peter and I like to have fun with, okay? But you're going to cut this is your sew line. You're going to cut a 1/4 inch away, and you're going to disregard this piece. And when you flip this piece up, that's what you're going to get, a connecting corner.
Would you know, I did one of these on a pattern once, and I was fussy cut in the center, and I squared it to where it was going this way.
Right.
So when I sewed everything on.
Right.
So you know what? Now I have a fancy place to put my mug on now. That block.
Oh, that block's for your mug.
That's my mistake mug. My mistake block.
Yeah, when you fussy cut, see.
I messed that one all up.
That was a good point, though, Peter. Look, if I'm going to fussy cut a block that's going to stay square and it's going to stay like this, I need to cut it like that. But like you said, that's why this ruler's so grand, because it has that center section and it has another line right here. See this black line going through there?
Uh-huh.
That goes right through the center. Now I can fussy cut that, what we call on point.
On point?
See, if I was to cut here, 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 and here, then this would be the focus and it would be on point. So then it would fit inside this, because this block ends up being on point. That's what we call it when it's turned on the diagonal like that. Okay? So I would find this piece right here is 5.5 inches. Okay? This block right here is 5.5 inches. I am not adding any length or width to this block. Do you see I'm just sewing things on top of it? So I know when I get done with this, it still should be 5.5 inches. Okay? And this E block is 5.5 inches. So it's going to fit this 5.5 inches and this 5.5 inches. All right? So that's that. So then you've got this unit of 5.5 inch squares, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Unit 9. Let's go up to find Unit 9. Unit 8. Unit 8 strips total. Follow the figure. Unit 9. It's not going to tell you how long that's going to be. You could figure it out yourself by going 5 minus 1/2 inch, because they're 5.5 inches, right?
Uh-huh.
So you take 5 is the finished size. Okay? And there's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55. So there's 55 of them. You haven't used up this 1/4 inch, and you haven't used up that 1/4 inch, so you have to add another 1/2 inch. So this should measure 55.5 inches.
Nice.
Nice. And then it just tells you how to assemble the whole thing. And here's the diagram that explains everything this page says. Here's the diagram. So you've got your block that you fussy cut. You've got these sections and these sections. You've made all those. So now you know, what did we say, how big that was? 55.5. You know this unit right here is 55.5. All right? So you know once this unit gets sewed all together, it's going to be what? 55.5. 55.5. 55.5. You're just going to keep sewing them. And they should all line up because you've measured each time. You've squared up, made sure they were square. If you get to this one and it's not the measurement it's supposed to be, don't think you're going to fudge it. Fudging is only a treat, okay? You cannot fudge your blocks. If they're 1/2 inch too big, I'll just cut some off at the end.
Pressing won't fix it.
No, you cannot do that. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. The innies and the outies must fit into each other. So do the blocks. The blocks have to fit with the block that's next to it. You cannot fudge. Because once you get it all sewn in into this big rectangle, then these have to fit. And if this is off, it's not going to fit. Well, I'll just cut it off. No, you can't do that because then this one won't fit.
Now you know what I've done before.
What have you done?
Because I wasn't paying attention to any of my measurements, I just cut my board, all those little strips longer, and then sewed them to the quilt and then trimmed off the ends.
Yeah, and then what did you get? A ripply border, didn't you?
I got quite the mess.
Yeah. What Peter is saying is that he cut these pieces longer, and he sewed them on, and then he just cut them flush, like this.
Yeah, this is a good opportunity to keep the square top nice and square.
Yes, don't do that because this could get ripply, because it could stretch out. If it's the same measurement and you've pinned it on, it's going to lay nice and flat. If you just sew it on willy-nilly, you could be stretching it. You could be making some places go farther, some places not so far. I mean, it's just a mess when you do that, especially the bigger they get. Okay, this little one, you might get away with it, but then you put this big gigantic one on, and if this one's a half an inch off, and you get this one an inch off, that's an inch and a half off, and you've got all that ripply that your quilter has to work in, or that you're going to have to work in when you quilt it. And sometimes it's not pretty, okay? So I hope you understand how to read a pattern, and I encourage you to go through your pattern. I know it takes a little time, but in the end, it will really make a difference in how you put together a quilt, okay?
For me, the pattern reading part it gets really overwhelming for me because there's so much. I have found that if I do it over the course of 3 days, that seems to be like the magic number for me.
Really?
Yeah, because I read it, then I can go back and read it again, and by the third time I read it, the stuff that didn't make sense makes sense.
Okay, but now as you make more and more quilts, Peter, that'll get easier and easier because you won't have to focus on the things like making a half square triangle. You don't have to focus on that so much because you've done it 100 times. You see, if borders are complicated for you, you may want to have to read those 2 or 3 times. But then as you've done several borders, that's going to become a second nature to you. You won't have to read that as much. So as you go along, you will learn the things that you need to concentrate on. That's why this highlighter is so important when you're going through your pattern for the first time. Okay? Now, I'm as guilty as the next person of not reading the pattern. Okay? And I'm not kidding. Every time I get in trouble. Every single time. Now, I am a pattern proofer, and so my highlighter...
The lady that reads patterns for a living.
Yeah, the lady who reads patterns for a living. That's why my highlighter is my best friend, okay? And my red pencil. I've got a red pencil at home because... people are sending me their patterns. I'm making the quilt, so I have to read every step. And if I think there's a better way to do it, then I can give my input. But, you know, the designer can take it or leave it. But it's important, I guess, for me to really emphasize that reading through the pattern before you begin is a good lesson. Okay, it's a good thing to do. It's a good tip. Okay, I'm going to get some sound effects for every time I say it's a good tip. It's going to be a little bell or something. We need one of those little ding bells. You know what I'm saying? Because every time I say that, I'm going to get me one of those. So anyway, I hope that helped you. It was my pleasure to share it with you. If you have any problems, any questions about anything, even if you have bought the book and the fabric someplace else, we are here to help you, okay? Just come in. We're here at Noblesville, Indiana at Always in Stitches, and it would be our pleasure to help you figure out your pattern. So, see you next time at the sewing machine. Bye-bye.